Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We are really glad you are hanging out with us today. We are going to open up the archives and blow off the dust, metaphorically speaking, of course, and look at a piece of history that honestly feels like it was written this morning.
It really is great to be here. And, you're right. 1741 might seem like a really long time ago, but human nature hasn't changed a bit in 300 years. I mean, the clothes are different, the technology has changed, but the human heart is the same.
Yeah, the source material we have sitting in front of us today is a letter. It's titled Letter to a New Convert, and it was written by none other than Jonathan Edwards. Now, for anyone who grew up in the American school system, the name Jonathan Edwards usually brings up like one very specific image.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. Sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Right. Fire, brimstone, spiders dangling over bottomless pits, that whole thing.
That is the stereotype, yes. And it really is a shame because it reduces this massive intellect and this very tender pastoral heart to just one single sermon. You have to remember, Edwards was a pastor. He was the theologian who cared intensely about the souls of the people in his congregation.
And this letter shows a completely different side of him, doesn't it?
It does. It's tender, it's very practical, and it is incredibly sharp regarding the psychology of how we operate. It's pastoral care at its absolute finest.
So let's set the scene a little bit. It is 1741. This is right in the middle, the absolute height of the Great Awakening in New England.
Right. The Great Awakening, this was a massive spiritual revival. Thousands of people are professing faith. Emotions are just running so high everywhere you look. Churches are packed to the rafters. People are falling down. They're crying out, having these really intense emotional experiences of God's holiness and their own need for salvation.
It sounds like an amazing time to be alive, but also, I don't know, maybe a little chaotic.
Oh, definitely chaotic. It was a time of incredible upheaval and joy, but also a time of massive confusion for a lot of people.
Because with any high point, there is always that inevitable question, what happens next? Like Monday morning rolls around.
That is the big question, and that's the whole reason this letter exists. Edwards is writing to a young friend. We think it was likely a young woman, just based on the context of the advice he gives, who has just recently professed faith. She is up on that spiritual mountaintop.
And he's writing to tell her how to stay up there. Or, wait, no, he's telling her how to survive when those initial feelings start to fade.
Precisely. That's the mission of our session today. We're going to analyze his advice. He gives 17 specific, very detailed points on how to maintain spiritual vitality. Because, let's be honest, we have all been there.
Oh, for sure. You go to a weekend retreat or you hear an amazing sermon series or you just have this personal moment where everything clicks. You are absolutely on fire. And then, well, then Tuesday happens. Real life hits you.
Tuesday always happens. Gravity always wins eventually. And Edwards knew that. He knew that spiritual cooling off is a massive, massive danger. So he isn't writing to hype her up or give her another emotional boost. He is giving her a battle plan for the long haul.
A battle plan. I really like that phrase. So let's jump into the first segment of this letter. Edward starts off with a bit of a paradox, actually. You would normally think, okay, I'm saved, I'm justified, I can finally relax now.
But he says the exact opposite.
He does. Point number one in his letter is remarkably counterintuitive. He advises this young convert to keep up the same earnestness in her religion as if she were still in a state of nature and seeking conversion.
Right.
Now, state of nature is a term we don't hear too often today. That means before she was a Christian, right?
Correct. The state of being unconverted, living according to the flesh. He's basically saying, remember how desperate you were a month ago. Remember how you pleaded with God for mercy. Do not stop doing that.
That is pretty intense. Because usually we tend to think of conversion as the finish line. I crossed the line, I got my medal, now I can sit down on the grass and drink a Gatorade.
That's a very common tendency, yeah. We view salvation as fire insurance. Once saved, always saved, so I can just put my feet up and cruise. But from a Reformed perspective, and certainly from where Edwards is sitting, conversion isn't the finish line. It is the starting gun.
So the work is just beginning.
Spot on. He argues that now that you are converted, you are under infinitely greater obligations to be watchful and laborious.
Obligation, that's a really heavy word. Why does he use that specific word?
Well, think about it. Before you were saved, you were seeking God out of fear, or maybe just out of a desire for self-preservation. You didn't want to go to hell. That is a natural, somewhat selfish instinct.
Sure, self-preservation is a pretty strong motivator.
But now,
Yeah.
you've been shown mercy. You've been adopted into the family. The obligation now is born out of gratitude and love. If you worked hard to save your own skin, how much harder should you work to honor the one who actually saved it for you.
Oh man, that makes a lot of sense. It is the difference between an employee working hard so they don't get fired and a business partner working hard because they actually own part of the company and love the mission. The whole motivation shifts.
It does. And Edwards warns her that if she lacks this earnestness, she will pierce herself through with many sorrows. She will grow cold. She will grow dark. He actually quotes the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 3 here.
Where Paul talks about pressing on.
Yes. Paul says he hasn't attained perfection yet, but he presses on toward the mark. If Paul, the giant of the faith, the guy who authored half the New Testament, hasn't arrived yet, this teenage convert certainly hasn't either.
It's a huge call to active sanctification. We don't just naturally drift into holiness.
No, you drift downstream. You have to actively swim to go upstream. Sanctification is a work of God's free grace. Yes, we believe that. But it is a work in which we are enabled to participate. We are not just passive blocks of wood.
Moving to his second point, Edwards throws out a phrase that actually confused me a little bit at first. He tells her to pray for a kind of new conversion. Wait a minute. If she is already converted, why is she praying for a new conversion? Is he implying she might lose her salvation?
Not at all. And this is where we really have to be careful with our theological terms. Edwards held very firmly to the perseverance of the saints, the idea that true believers will make it to the end. He is a Calvinist through and through.
Okay, good. That's what I thought.
So he isn't talking about rejustification. He is talking about the experiential reality of the Christian life.
Unpack that for us a bit. What does he mean by experiential reality?
He tells her she should pray for the very same thing she prayed for before she was saved, that her eyes would be opened, that she would receive sight, that she would see the glory of God. He says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, those who have the most of these things still have the greatest need to pray for them.
Because we still have blind spots, even after conversion.
Because we are still partially blind. We live in this tension of the already and the not yet. Yes, you are saved. Yes, you are justified before God. But Edwards lists the enemies that are still inside the city walls. Blindness, hardness of heart, pride, spiritual death. Those things remain in the believer.
So asking for a new conversion is kind of like asking God to wake you up again.
It is asking for a fresh view of God's glory. It's a daily renewal of your spiritual senses. You know, you can be married for 20 years, but you still need to wake up today and choose to love your spouse, to see them clearly, to not take them for granted.
Right, if you stop doing that, the marriage just goes completely cold.
Precisely. And Edwards is saying the exact same thing about our relationship with God. Don't rely on the memory of a spiritual experience you had 3 weeks ago. You need a fresh sight of Christ today.
He actually says something really striking here. He says, there are very few requests that are proper for an impenitent man, that are not also proper for the godly.
That is incredibly humbling.
It really is. It puts the longtime believer sitting right on the same bench as the brand new seeker. We are all just beggars asking for bread.
We never graduate from the basics of the gospel. We just go deeper into them. A new conversion is really just a new realization of the gospel's daily reality. It is what Paul meant when he talked about the inner man being renewed day by day.
Let's move into the second segment here. This is where Edwards gets into how we consume information, specifically how we listen to sermons. This is point number 3. He tells her, hear for yourself.
Oh, this is a classic. We are all so guilty of this.
I know I am.
You are sitting in church, the pastor makes a really good point about anger or greed, and you immediately think, oh, I really hope my husband is listening to this. This describes him perfectly.
Or, man, I wish my boss was here this morning. He really needs to hear this point about humility. I think we have all done that mental handoff.
Edwards cuts that off at the knees. Is when you hear a sermon, the chief intent of your mind must be, in what respect is this applicable to me?
Even if the sermon is directed at people who aren't believers at all, say a sermon warning about hell.
Even then, because there is always a personal application. If the pastor is preaching on the danger of hell, the believer should be asking, am I truly grateful that I've been delivered from this? Or, is there any hypocrisy in my own heart that looks like this? It is all about taking personal ownership. You cannot grow on food that you feed to someone else.
Oh, wow. You cannot grow on food you feed to someone else. That is such a good line. It seems so obvious, but we are absolute experts at dodging conviction.
We are. We use other people as shields to deflect the word. We say, well, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not nearly as bad as that guy over there. Edwards wants to strip away all those shields. He wants the word to hit the listener directly in the chest.
Now, point number 4 deals with memory. Edwards tells her to remember her past. Specifically, he uses this analogy of being a bond slave in the land of Egypt.
He is drawing heavily on the Old Testament imagery of Israel there. God constantly told the Israelites, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Why did he do that? So they wouldn't get arrogant. It's very easy to think you were born free when you have been living free for a while.
So it seems like Edwards wants her to keep her past sins in the rearview mirror, but close enough to still see them clearly.
Close enough to remain humble. He points to Paul again for this. Paul called himself the chief of sinners and the least of the apostles. Paul never forgot that he used to literally persecute the church. He didn't wallow in it, he didn't let it paralyze him, but he didn't delete the file either.
But isn't there a real danger there? If God has forgiven and forgotten my sin, why should I keep remembering it? Isn't that just beating myself up? Isn't that contrary to the joy we are supposed to have in salvation?
There's a big difference between morbid guilt and humble gratitude. Edwards references Ezekiel 16, verse 63. It is a fascinating verse. It talks about being silent because of shame when God is pacified towards you.
Wait, so God is at peace with you, but you are still silent because you realize how much that peace cost him.
Yes, that is the heart of it. It is that overwhelming feeling of grace. If you forget your sin entirely, grace becomes cheap. It just becomes something you assume you deserve. But if you remember the bond slavery of Egypt, then every single day of freedom is a literal miracle. It fuels your worship. You cannot sing Amazing Grace if you have completely forgotten the wretch like me part.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, point number 5. This is where I think a lot of listeners might pump the brakes hard. Edwards argues that sins committed after conversion are actually worse than sins committed before conversion.
It is a shocking statement, isn't it? We naturally tend to think, well, I'm a Christian now, I'm covered by the blood, so my everyday sins aren't quite as big a deal anymore. Edwards says, no, they are a much bigger deal.
But why? What is his logic there? Because logically, the pre-conversion sins are the ones that condemned us in the first place.
It all comes back to relationship and knowledge. Before you were converted, you were sinning in ignorance mostly. You were sinning against a judge you didn't really know. But now, you are sinning against a father who adopted you. You are sinning against the Christ who bled for you. It is a direct abuse of kindness.
So it's the betrayal aspect. It becomes intensely personal.
Yes. Think about the Westminster Confession, which Edwards would have fully subscribed to. It has a whole section on the aggravations of sin. Some sins are more heinous in the sight of God than others. And one of the primary things that makes a sin more heinous is if it is committed against great grace.
So if I know the truth, if I have tasted the goodness of God, and then I actively choose to lie or cheat or harbor hate against someone, that weighs a lot more heavily on the scale.
It does. It is rank ingratitude. And in the Reformed theological framework, ingratitude is one of the absolute ugliest sins imaginable. It turns the grace of God into a license for sloppy, selfish living. Edwards wants this young convert to feel the full weight of that, not to crush her spirit, but to keep her vigilant. He wants her to realize that sinning now breaks God's heart in a way it simply didn't before.
And that leads perfectly into the next segment, because if I sit here and really think about how my post-conversion sins are actually worse than my old life, I could get pretty depressed. I could easily get crushed under that kind of weight.
You certainly could, and Edwards anticipates that completely. He was a master physician of the soul. He knows that if he pushes too hard on the guilt pedal, the whole engine is going to stall out. So point number 6 provides the necessary balance.
He says, be always greatly abased for your remaining sin, but yet be not discouraged. That is quite a tightrope walk. Greatly abased, but not discouraged. How do you actually do both of those at the same time?
You can only do both if you look outside of yourself. If I look at my sin, I am abased. I am brought low. But if I look at Christ, I am encouraged. This is where Edwards brings in the advocate.
Jesus Christ the righteous.
Yes. And listen to the specific imagery he uses here. He says, the preciousness of Christ's blood and the merit of his righteousness infinitely overtop the highest mountains of our sins.
That is such a vivid picture. I just imagine my own sins as this massive Everest, this insurmountable, terrifying peak. And then Edwards says Christ's merit just floods completely over it, drowning the peak entirely.
It is a comparison of the finite versus the infinite. Your sin, no matter how terrible it is finite. It has a limit, has a bottom. Christ's merit is infinite. It has no bottom and no top. So you can be totally honest about the mountain of your sin because you are even more confident in the ocean of his grace.
So the solution to dealing with guilt isn't to say, oh, my sin really isn't that bad. The solution is to say, my sin is terrible, but my Savior is infinitely greater.
Precisely. If you minimize your sin just to make yourself feel better, you are just playing psychological mind games. But if you magnify Christ to feel better, you are worshiping. That is the gospel key.
I really like that phrasing. Don't minimize sin, magnify Christ. But then there is another enemy lurking right around the corner. Point number 8. Edwards calls it the worst viper.
Pride.
Why does he call it a viper? That is a very specific choice of words.
Well, a viper is deadly, but it is also very quiet. It hides in the tall grass. You don't even see it until it strikes you. Edwards identifies pride as the most dangerous sin because it is the first sin ever committed, referring to Satan's fall, and it lies lowest in the foundation of our hearts.
It's the root cause of everything else. It is the core desire to be our own God.
It is. But what makes it a viper, what makes it so tricky, is how it hides. Edwards says it creeps insensibly into the midst of religion. It can even hide under the disguise of humility itself.
Okay, that right there just blows my mind. How can humility be proud?
Well, have you ever met someone who is visibly proud of how humble they are?
Yeah. Huh? I am the most humble person in this entire room. Yeah, I think I might have actually said that once or twice in my life.
Right. Or it can be a lot more subtle than that. You can become proud of how much you have repented. Like, I cried more during the worship service than anyone else in my row. Or I felt more broken over my sin today than you did. That is just pride wearing a humility costume. Turns a spiritual experience into a weird competition.
That is terrifying, honestly. It's like a virus that adapts to the medicine you take. You try to be humble to kill the pride, and the pride just feeds on your humility.
That is the deceitfulness of the human heart at work. Edwards wants her to be hyper-aware of this dynamic. Spiritual pride is the specific danger for the new convert because they have just had this incredible, massive experience. They feel special. They feel chosen. And suddenly, almost without realizing it, they start looking down on everyone else who isn't feeling what they are feeling.
So how do you fight something that tricky? If trying to be humble just makes me proud of my humility, what do I actually do?
You have to keep looking at the standard. If you compare yourself to other people, you can always find a way to feel superior. But if you compare yourself to Christ, pride dies instantly. You cannot be proud when you are standing next to the blazing sun. You just feel incredibly small and incredibly grateful.
This brings us to segment 4, which is all about affections or our emotions and how to handle doubt. Edwards gives us a really clear model for true worship in point 7. He points to Mary Magdalene.
It's that famous scene from Luke chapter 7. She crashes the dinner party. She's weeping, washing Jesus' feet with her tears, wiping them with her hair. It is a scandalous scene in so many ways for that culture.
And Edwards focuses on her posture. She casts herself at his feet. She kisses them. She pours out the expensive ointment.
It is a picture of total, unhindered abandon. A pure and broken heart. This connects right back to the pride issue we were just talking about. Mary didn't care at all what the Pharisees thought of her. She didn't care about maintaining her dignity in public. She was just consumed with love for Christ. Edwards is saying to this young convert, be like her. Don't be the stiff, dignified religious person standing in the back of the room evaluating everything. Be the broken person weeping at the feet of Jesus.
And then in the point 9, he gives her a diagnostic tool. How do I know if my spiritual experiences are real? Because during the Great Awakening, people were seeing visions, they were hearing voices, all kinds of wild stuff was happening. How do you know what is legitimate and what is just hype?
Edwards was very concerned about false fire. He wrote extensively on this in a whole book called Religious Affections. But here in this letter, he gives 2 very simple criteria. First, does the experience make you feel least and lowest? Does it make you feel like a little child? And second, does it fix your heart on self-denial and spending yourself for God?
So if I have a massive spiritual experience that makes me feel like a giant, like I'm suddenly a spiritual superhero who has it all figured out,
then it is probably just your ego talking. True contact with God always shrinks the self. It makes you feel small, but totally safe, like a child. It destroys your sense of self-importance.
and the second part, does it lead to action? Does it lead to actual self-denial?
Right. If you claim to have a vision from God, but you still treat your neighbors like garbage, Edwards would say your vision is completely worthless. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, not just spiritual goosebumps, A true experience of God makes you want to serve others, not demand that others serve you.
Moving on to point 10, this one is huge for me personally. Handling doubt. Edwards talks about dark and dull frames of mind.
Which will definitely happen. He pretty much guarantees it. You cannot live your whole life on the mountaintop.
But his advice here is really surprising. He says, do not consume too much time and strength in reviewing your past experience. Basically, don't sit around all day analyzing whether you were really saved 3 years ago.
This is a trap that so many Reformed people fall into. We get so obsessed with authenticity and making sure our election is sure that we become spiritual archaeologists. We are constantly digging up our own past to see if the bones of our conversion are actually real. Edward says, stop doing that.
But why? It seems like examining yourself is a biblical, healthy thing to do.
It is in moderation, but constantly looking at your past is looking at a dead thing. It's a memory. And memories are highly prone to distortion based on how you feel today. He says one new discovery of the glory of Christ's face will do more toward scattering clouds of darkness in 1 minute than examining old experience through a whole year.
Wow, 1 minute of looking at Christ is worth an entire year of looking at yourself.
Yes, if you are doubting your salvation, the answer isn't to pull out your conversion certificate and check the date. The answer is to look at Jesus right now, today. Do you love him now? Do you need him right now? Then go to him now. Pursue new light instead of analyzing old light.
It is the difference between checking the thermostat and just opening the window. You can stare at the thermostat all day trying to figure out if it is working, or you can just open the blinds and let the actual sun into the room.
That is a perfect analogy. And that is exactly the concept he uses in point 11 regarding fear. He says you cannot cast out fear by fighting it directly. You cast it out by reviving and prevailing love.
The quote he uses is beautiful. Darkness in a room is removed only by letting in the pleasant beams of the sun. You don't grab a shovel and try to shovel darkness out the door.
No, you can't fight a negative with another negative. You fight a negative with a positive. If you are filled with fear or anxiety about your standing with God, don't just sit there trying to stop being afraid. That never works. You just end up thinking about fear more. Instead, focus on the love of God. Focus on what Christ has done. As love fills the room of your mind, fear naturally gets pushed out the back door. Perfect love casts out fear.
It is so incredibly practical. It is basically psychological displacement. Fill your mind with the good stuff, and the bad stuff just has no room to live there anymore.
It is practical, yes, but it is deeply theological at its core. It asserts that Christ is infinitely more powerful than our internal struggles. We are passive in the sense that we receive the light, but we are active in the sense that we have to walk over and open the curtains.
Let's move into the fifth segment now. Practical disciplines. This is where the rubber really meets the road for daily life. Point 12 deals with evangelism and admonition.
Edwards tells this young woman to counsel and warn others, but again, the way she goes about it matters immensely.
He says to do it earnestly and affectionately, and this specific part really stood out to me. He says, when you are speaking to your equals, let your warnings be intermixed with expressions of your sense of your own unworthiness.
That is crucial advice. If you go to a friend and just say, you need to stop sinning, you immediately sound like a judge. But if you say, look, I struggle with this exact same thing, I'm totally unworthy, but God's grace is enough for both of us to get through this role, then you sound like a fellow pilgrim on the same road.
He connects this to sovereign grace. He says to acknowledge that grace is the only reason you differ from them.
This is the absolute death of self-righteousness. Why am I a Christian and my neighbor isn't? Is it because I'm somehow smarter? No. Is it because I have better morals? No. It is solely because God mercifully intervened in my life. If you really believe that, you cannot possibly be arrogant when you share the gospel. You are just one beggar telling another beggar where you found some bread.
Point 13 is a really quick one, but it's super interesting historically. He recommends religious meetings of young women, basically small groups.
It is the 18th century version of a small group Bible study. Edwards recognized that we are social creatures, we desperately need community, and specifically, he encourages peer groups here. Young women meeting with young women. There is a safety and a specific practical application there that you might not get in a massive mixed assembly on a Sunday morning. He was intentionally structuring her social life for spiritual support.
Then we get to point 14, fasting and confession. Now, Edwards isn't talking about the general forgive us our debts prayer we all pray corporately on Sunday morning.
No, not at all. He advises setting apart a whole day for secret prayer and fasting. And the method of confession he prescribes is, well, it's intense. He calls for a very particular rehearsal.
A particular rehearsal, what does that actually look like in practice?
He says to go through your entire life from childhood all the way to the present moment. He wants you to list out specific sins, not just saying, Lord, I was a rebellious teenager. He wants you to say, I lied to my mother on this specific date about where I was going. I stole this specific item. I harbored deep hatred against this specific person.
And he adds, with the circumstances and aggravations. So not just the act itself, but the context surrounding it. Like, I did this while fully knowing better. Or I did this right after taking communion.
Exactly. Why does he want her to do this? Is he just trying to make her feel terrible about herself?
No.
He is trying to break the power of denial. We love to hide behind comfortable generalizations. Oh, I'm a sinner. Nobody's perfect. That is a shield we use to protect our pride.
Yeah.
When you get specific, when you say, I was cruel to my sister because I was deeply jealous of her success, you cannot hide anymore. You have to drag that specific ugly sin out into the light and kill it.
It totally forces you to confront the reality of who you actually are without the religious mask.
And it makes the grace of God feel incredibly real. If I confess a general vague sin, I kind of just feel a general vague forgiveness.
Yeah.
But if I confess a specific, ugly, detailed sin, and I realize God still loves me and forgives me right there in that moment, that creates a deep, unshakable assurance that nothing can take away.
It's like cleaning out a messy closet. You can't just shove everything into a cardboard box and tell yourself it's clean. You have to take every single item out, look at it, and decide what to do with it.
And Edwards says to spread all the abominations of your heart before him. God already knows all of them. You aren't surprising him with new information. You are just finally agreeing with him about what is actually in your heart.
That brings us to the final segment, the public walk and our final reliance. Point 15 is all about reputation. Adorn the doctrine of God.
This is what I call the billboard effect.
Yeah.
You are walking around your city wearing the jersey of Team Jesus. How you play the game reflects directly on the coach.
He says, do not let the adversaries of the cross have occasion to reproach religion on your account. That is a really high bar to clear.
It is. During the Great Awakening, there were plenty of critics standing on the sidelines looking for any reason to dismiss the movement. They would say, oh, look at those fanatics. They are hysterical. They are actually immoral behind closed doors. Edwards is saying to her, do not hand them ammunition. Be meek. Be lowly. Be full of pure love.
Account others better than yourself.
That is the ultimate key to social harmony. If everyone in a local church actually did that, actually considered the person sitting next to them in the pew as more important than themselves, 90% of church conflict would vanish overnight.
And then, point 16, this might be my absolute favorite imagery in the whole letter. He summarizes the entire Christian walk.
The image of the child.
Walk with God as a little, poor, helpless child taking hold of Christ's hand.
It is just beautiful. It totally contradicts the modern idea of the strong, independent Christian warrior. In the kingdom, we never grow up into independence. We actually grow down into deeper dependence.
And where is the child looking in this picture, keeping your eye on the marks of the wounds in his hands and side?
That is a relentless focus on the atonement. Why do we look at the wounds? Because that is the undeniable proof of his love. That is the actual payment for our sin. When you are walking through a terrifying life, holding Christ's hand, and you look down and see the nail scar on that hand, you know you are safe.
And the final part of that image is so comforting. Hiding your nakedness under the skirt of the white shining robes of his righteousness.
That is the core doctrine of imputed righteousness. By ourselves, we are naked in our sin. We have absolutely nothing of our own to cover ourselves. Christ wraps us in his own perfect robe. When God the Father looks at us, he doesn't see our nakedness or our failure. He sees the white, shining, perfect robe of Jesus.
It is the entire gospel captured in a single, beautiful picture. A helpless child holding a scarred hand wrapped in a robe that isn't theirs.
If you grasp that image, you grasp Christianity. You grasp Reformed theology. It's all right there. Total dependence. Substitutionary atonement.
Imputation.
Finally, we hit point 17, intercession. He asks her to pray for ministers and the global church.
Specifically, he asks that God would carry on the glorious work. Edwards fully believed the Great Awakening was a prelude to the global, triumphant kingdom of God. He asked this young girl to look way beyond her own soul and pray for the whole world to be full of God's glory. It is a great reminder that our personal piety is meant to fuel a global mission. We aren't just saved for our own comfort. We are part of something massive.
And notice how he signs off the letter. Your affectionate friend who rejoices over you and desires to be your servant. This absolute giant of theology, arguably the greatest mind America ever produced, viewing himself as the humble servant of a teenage convert. That is humility in actual practice.
So we have walked through all 17 points. Let's try to pull this all together. What is the core tension we are seeing here?
I think the core tension is between incredibly high effort and total helpless reliance. Edwards demands a lot from her. He says, work, watch, pray, fast, confess your sins in detail, warn your neighbors, adorn the gospel. It sounds completely exhausting. But at the exact same time, he says, you are a helpless child, you are wrapped in a robe you didn't buy, and Christ's infinite merit drowns your finite sin.
It is the paradox of the Apostle Paul. I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me.
That's right. We work because we are secure. We do not work to get secure.
And as for relevance, does this advice land for you today?
Absolutely. We live in a culture of constant burnout. Spiritual burnout is a massive epidemic in the church. We have these emotional highs, and then we completely crash. Edwards offers a way to stabilize. He says, stop obsessing over your fluctuating feelings. Stop digging around in your past. Look at the wounds of Christ. That is the only thing in the universe that doesn't change.
Well, here's a thought to leave you with today, a challenge for you, if you will. Edwards suggests that constantly looking back at past religious experiences is often a trap. We love to talk about the day we were saved or that amazing youth retreat back in 1998. But the question Edwards poses to us is not, was I converted years ago? The question is, am I seeking a fresh view of Christ's glory today?
That is the vital question. Is your faith a museum of old artifacts, or is it a living room where you are interacting with God today?
And maybe, just maybe, try that particular rehearsal of confession he talked about. I know it sounds scary, it sounds intense to write it all out, but if Edwards is right, it might be the pathway to a kind of freedom you haven't felt in a really long time. Get specific with God, he can handle it.
He already knows it all anyway.
Yeah.
He is just waiting for you to bring it to him so he can cover it with that white shining robe.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us on Reformed Thinking. We hope this deep dive into Jonathan Edwards gives you some solid tools for the long walk home.
Keep looking at the wounds.
We will catch you next time.